is very rare. I mean, I think the last war we have known in which there were no significant civilian casualties was the Falklands War. I'm very troubled by this. I think that the fact that we now have the Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, and we are beginning to get a system of international justice is important. To me, I find the bombing of Dresden in February 1945 very, very difficult to justify. I was on this ship last week. There was a lecture going on about the magnificence of the Lancaster bomber. 32,000 people were killed in those 2 nights and days. Most of them civilians, most of them refugees. And Churchill himself wrote, this casts a query over the Allied conduct of the war. It's very hard to justify civilian casualties. It's very hard to fight a war without them. And I think, as a result of what's happened in these last years, I hope we now have a generation of political leaders who are not quite so gung-ho about going to war. In this, there's a long poem. There are lots of poems against Tony Blair, but they're all in that.
Does this mean then that you wouldn't support our retention of a nuclear deterrent?
Not necessarily. I find it, the future is so unforeseeable that the proliferation of nuclear weapons is so important. As I remember, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, they all signed on to it, was with an understanding that those powers who already had them would start to negotiate them downwards, if not away. And with the revamping of Trident, we are now going to have a much greater nuclear capacity than we ever had before.
I'll just ask, you mentioned the difference between your attitude now and your youthful self. I presume some heroes have changed. Do you have a hero or two, historical, military?
Oh yeah, of course I do. I mean, my heroes are people who stand out against the current of the times and personally sacrifice in the interests of their people and the personal resolution of problems. And obviously, Nelson Mandela is one of those. I think Václav Havel is another, and Lech Walesa. I can't think of quite so many heroes on the British political scene, but maybe we found it too easy. But in here, I've got lots of heroes. People who stand out against the savagery of the times, Bosnians helping other Bosnians from a different community. And UN soldiers and British soldiers risking lives to save lives. There's a lovely man in there called Larry Hollingworth who ran the UN Refugee Agency. Actually, one of my, I'm really straying off here, one of the things I think is really interesting is the way that high-profile individuals are helping to change the world. I'm thinking of two in particular, George Clooney and Angelina Jolie. I don't know if you know this, George has personally financed a satellite up in the sky over Sudan watching troop movements. And this is, he's able to do this because he's got the money and the clout and he's listened to by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And as for Angelina, if when you go home, you should Google my name against hers, you will find an interview I did with her, which has taken more than 50,000 hits on the internet, and nobody logged on to look at me. The reason was that I was asked to MC an award ceremony in Geneva last October, at which she was being honoured for 10 years service to the UN Refugee Agency. And she was magnificent. But in that interview, she gives a wonderful account of how to her, we tend to think of refugees as a burden. To her, they're an inspiration. I mean, this is a busy woman. In 10 years, she's been on something like 40 field trips for the UNHCR. Now, I mean, she's obviously a high-profile heroic figure. There are a lot in here that you would never have heard of, but they are equally heroic. An awful lot of creeps as well. Television news attracts some of the shoddiest characters in the world. A bit like politics, people who think they can succeed at each other's expense. Yeah.
Could you explain a little more of your comment that refugees are heroes?
I'm not saying refugees are heroes, but they are an inspiration, she found. An inspiration in the sense that what they endure, their strength within the group, the way they look after each other and their families, in traditions in which the condition in which the rest of us with our easy, peaceful lives have got no idea. I know she draws inspiration from that. I mean, I met some in South Sudan. I mean, what you've seen what this woman had carried with her head and her 8 children, because typically the husband has been killed or gone missing. Just amazing. And then, you know, I found this in Bosnia, and I say in this book, I would come home from 6 weeks in the burning Balkans, and I find complete incomprehension. People have got no idea. A lot of the soldiers coming back from Afghanistan feel the same thing. Nobody wants to know. Nobody understands. Nobody understands the risks they take, the suffering. I mean, courage is not exclusive to soldiers. I met a guy 2 years ago at a wedding. He joined he was a captain in the Rifles, heavily in the Green Jackets. And he took part in Operation Panther's Claw. It must have been in the summer of 2009, where the Rifles suffered particularly heavy casualties. Before he went out, he got married. He's left the army since, and he told me that of the 8 men of his Guard of Honour, 4 are now amputees. Do our politicians understand it? I don't think they do. I hope it hasn't been too heavy, really.
The traditional last question.
Oh, to a white suit question. Can I answer a white suit question? It's got no ethical significance at all. It helps to keep me alive in dangerous places. Yes, sir.
I wonder, it's not exactly this lighter note, but a more general one. My wife and I can't be the only people here who lived in Yugoslavia many years ago, when it seemed to be a well-integrated, relatively happy place, liberal by standards of the Eastern Bloc there. I mean, you must have thought yourself, you know, what on earth happened? Wasn't just the control of one strong man over these disparate communities, or?
I think what happened in the Second World War had a lot to do with it. I mean, it was so catastrophic for so many families. General Mladic was an orphan of that war. There were massacres on a huge scale. People took different sides, and of course the Croats became a puppet fascist state. There was, I think I'm right in saying, there was no worse concentration camp anywhere than Jasenovac in Croatia. But I do actually address this issue in the book, because I thought too, and in Bosnia they're the closest of doing it. The war in Bosnia began when a peace demonstration, finally of people of mixed marriages, old Titoists, was fired on by Serbs. Then I asked the Croat, I said, well, why do you, after all these years, you were living peacefully together? He said, we were living peacefully together because every 200 meters there was a policeman making sure we lived peacefully together. But something it taught me is the power of nationalism. In all those years, the old songs, the old flags, even the old photographs were banned. As soon as it started to fall apart, 20 years ago now, you would see Croats driving around with pictures on the back of their car of Ante Pavelic, the mustachioed leader. And of course Milosevic got where he did by playing the nationalist card. Tudjman likewise. So what it's taught me is that the power of nationalism. And do go back. Bosnia is a wonderful, beautiful place, and they'll treat you very nicely. Extremely favourable rate of exchange.
I'm reluctant to wind up. It's a wonderful talk. I'd just like to say that on a vulgar note, you did get £3 off the book. That just makes it a very cheap book. I'd like to thank Martin very much. Perhaps you'll get an answer to your question, which I'll be Martin given about, because people will carry on. Melissa Bell is reporting, isn't she, your daughter, on France 24?
France 24.
So you can see the young Bell in the evening. Thank you. When Martin walked into the shop, he said, Canterbury, I remember, good, intelligent audience. It's been fantastic. Thanks for those concise, wide-ranging questions. And Martin's going to be here for a while. Thank you.